Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Lori, and welcome to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. This podcast fosters curiosity and understanding about neurodiversity while empowering individuals with tools for acceptance and inclusion in classrooms, the workplace, and communities. Featuring shared stories of neurodiverse life experiences, it sheds light on navigating a world not designed for diversity. Universally Unique starts now. Hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Lori, and this is Universally Unique. My guest today is Jamie Arber, who is the Executive Director of the Supported Living Group, which is a not-for-profit in Connecticut that supports individuals who have had brain injuries. And before we jump into finding out more about Jamie, we will take a few breaths. We'll do 3 box breaths. I'll count for us. We're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and repeat. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and a nice sigh, and we're done. I'm starting to realize it's very hard to count and participate at the same time. But so Jamie, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Jamie is actually our first sort of working professional who has not identified as being part of a neurodiverse group of individuals. And he has the opportunity to support a number of individuals who have had what traumatic brain injury or acquired brain injury. Those 2 phrases seem to kind of float back and forth, I think, depending upon who you're talking to. So how about you tell us your journey? How did you find yourself in this area of your field? I know that you have a psychology background and a clinical background as well. What drew you to folks with traumatic brain injuries?
I fell into the field after I secured my master's degree in clinical community psychology. And I was looking for an employment position, and I was given the opportunity to go to like a small brain injury provider organization. And I interviewed at that location, and they didn't know what to do with me. I didn't have a title. They just wanted to see, I think it was a little bit of a glamour hire in terms of a master's degree coming into the program. And, very, very rapidly, I started to work with the individuals and get a feel for brain injury and as service participants. What I noticed very quickly on my first day within the organization, I was talking to one of the brain injury survivors, and I noticed that the gentleman had scars in exactly the same place that I had on my head. And I had been a victim of a pretty vicious assault growing up in England. In my early 20s, I got hit with a crowbar and a construction bar, and was kept in hospital for almost a month. They wouldn't let me leave. They wouldn't let me fly back to continue my studies. Because they were worried about brain swell. But they didn't really go into the whole traumatic brain injury piece while I was there, or acquired brain injury while I was in hospital at the time. So I was kind of blissfully unaware that I had been a victim of a TBI. Um, and the only repercussions really for myself were I have certain scars on my head, and I've got one above my eye, and also my ability to retain numbers. So if you give me a phone number, I really struggle with that.
Hmm.
Dates, birth dates, I struggle with, much to the annoyance of my wife. So I have to make sure I keep all that stuff with reminders in my phone. But it was never really discussed. And in that first day, it was kind of an eye-opening situation where I realized this could be me sitting here. And I think that kind of gave me a strong foundation on my journey. And very rapidly, some of the skills that I had developed professionally over the years in terms of sales and marketing were elements that weren't really present in the field at that point. It was very human service driven, direct services. So that sales and marketing, going out and meeting a conservator or a potential service participant in their homes, having a cup of tea or coffee with them, discussing what we could do, and making sure that I was available to meet their needs if there were problems that came up, was alien to a lot of the individuals that we were providing services to. And by doing that, I think I developed a good reputation in the field, and my success enabled me to move very rapidly into upper management within that organization. And I've kind of stayed within upper management ever since.
I find it fascinating though that, I mean, I don't really have a good sense of how old you are, but I'm anticipating that the period of time in which you had that injury, the idea that somebody would have a brain injury was not like a totally foreign idea. Like, and they just sort of sent you on your way after they thought you were better, which I find sort of frightening, but I suspect is not an uncommon occurrence.
Yeah, it happened in England. I used to fly back to England while I was at university here for my undergraduate. I went to Westcom for a little while for a couple of years, and I used to fly back to England in the summer. So it was an NHS hospital. I think they just wanted to make sure I was okay. Again, I wasn't having seizure activity. They had monitored the swelling and kind of realized that I could fly without there being any big risks. But what you're saying actually occurs often here
Hmm.
as well as in England, where
Yeah,
individuals maximize their insurance, insurance stops wanting to pay, and individuals with often complex brain injuries are just sent home to be with their families.
yeah,
And that can be very, very difficult for, a husband or a wife that were married and their partner had a brain injury. All of a sudden everything gets turned upside down. And often there is, in a lot of brain injuries, there's kind of a rapid period of recovery and then a plateau and then
yep,
a drop off. So when the hospital were doing their assessments, you're seeing that rapid period of recovery,
yeah.
and then they're missing out on the drop offs. The drop offs are happening when the individual's back in the community, which can be hugely problematic.
Yeah, which I would anticipate as part of the reason why many of these individuals are not gainfully employed or are underemployed or
Yeah.
not employed at all,
Yeah.
because people don't know that there's a piece that they needed before we sent them back out into the world, or that we needed a follow-up component to that.
There's definitely a follow-up component. If the individuals are not lucky enough to be on the acquired brain injury waiver program in Connecticut, where there are supports in place to assist the individual towards that competitive employment and maintaining employment, they're kind of out there on their own, and they're
Yeah.
potentially going to be underemployed, unemployed, or struggling in an employment position. It's very rare somebody can sustain a brain injury and then return back to the job without any accommodations.
Yeah. And it's my understanding, if my memory is correct, brain injuries are one of the more common things too that also happen before the developmental period is over, which then I think puts children in a different place too, because they were children who started school as a typically developing child, and at some point in time in that experience, they they have an injury and they come back to school and they're different. I remember having a student at one point who had a student who he actually fell out of a tree, I believe was what happened. and had a traumatic brain injury. He came back to school. No one said anything, acted like he was the same kid that he was before. She came into my class, which was focused on students that had exceptionalities, and she's like, this is not the same kid that left me
Yeah.
before this happened. And he can't do some of the things he used to be able to do before, but no one's recognizing that he now has a disability. And, so she went back and advocated for him. And I think that kind of worked out for him. But I didn't think that was a very uncommon situation either, which there's at
No,
least supports within the school system if somebody pushes for it.
yeah, and it's tough because it's an invisible injury a lot of the
Yeah.
time, and you almost have to think of it as almost like a bell curve. So you have young children who are learning to walk, these types of things. Their full risk are very, very high.
Very
Then
high.
you kind of go into the teenage years where it's risk taking, like frontal lobe's not developed, so the risk of injury is very high. Contact sports start coming into the equation as well. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum where you're aging and falls are a lot more,
Common.
a lot higher in occurrence, and your ability to brace yourself as falling or when you're falling is reduced as well. So the opportunity for a head strike is significant.
Yeah.
They, neuropsychologists often say, in my experience, it's better to get the injury later in life than earlier in life because you have more to fall back on. There's more memory storage, there's more experiences,
Yeah.
there's just more neural networks for you to rely upon as backup systems than if you're a child who's still in that developmental stage
Yeah.
of brain growth.
Yeah, I mean, and as you point out, it's like there are so many different disabilities that are invisible. And then
Yeah.
I think people in a variety of settings sometimes misinterpret, or they
Yes.
think that somebody is just, well, you're being lazy or you're not living up to your potential, or, whatever it happens to be. I know I had seen something within recent years about girls who play soccer. There was a very high risk for
Yeah.
them to have an acquired brain injury because they shouldn't be hitting the ball with their head, but they
Yeah.
are. And then they're having headaches and seizures and all these other things that are making their lives very complicated.
There's also the higher opportunity for head clashes going on because you've got two girls jumping up to head the ball at the same time, and that's a real risk factor that's in there as well.
Yeah, it makes me wonder how many people were walking around at some point in time when we had no idea that some of these things were a problem,
Yeah,
uh, when, kids were playing football and they would have a concussion that more often than not, unfortunately, the coach would say, "Oh, you got your bell rung, get back up and get
yeah,
back in the game." And now, we've unfortunately seen many professional athletes, the disintegration that they've experienced. And some of them recognized that and kind of flagged it and said, I'm leaving, but check out my brain. Um, and others did things that they didn't even, I don't think they really were aware that they were even completely doing because there was so much damage.
yeah. As I said, the impulsivity goes up, and some of the behavioral issues definitely increase.
Yeah. So tell me, do you have a story that you're like, this was probably one of my best successes, or not necessarily your best success, but somebody's best success as an individual that you got to watch and maybe be part of supporting?
Yeah, there's one young lady, I can say her name because she's pretty well known. It's Lorena Pablo. Um, she is a growing artist in the disability community.
Hmm.
She actually suffered a stroke at the age of 26.
Oh, wow.
She was a mother, two children, and had the
Mhm.
stroke. And when she was in the recovery after the stroke, she had left-sided physical weakness, and she had expressive aphasia, which means word finding difficulties because of the nature of her brain injury, and some of the memory elements are also incorporated into that brain injury alongside the functional elements. Her mum became conservator of person of estate for the children, and she managed to find a place on the acquired brain injury waiver program. So when I first met Lorraine, it was early 2010. And she laughs about it, but I always refer to that as like the Adrian out of Rocky stage, where she
Hmm.
had the hat and the glasses, and she would sit very quietly and be very introverted. But she had an interesting talent in terms of her artwork, where she had the weakness on one side. She had developed an art technique where she would tear paper and place it on a piece to create an image. And it jumped out at me when I was again learning about brain injury, stepping into the field. There was this very quiet young lady who was working in this way, and I would talk to her and say that this is amazing stuff. And we developed a good professional relationship. I think she trusted me, and she would listen to me in terms of if there were problems going on, or giving her advice in terms of her independence and working towards her independence. And over the years, no matter where I ended up moving to as an agent, as a manager or a director of an agency, Lorraine would follow. And it's got to the stage now where she went from those little A4 pieces of paper to developing these huge, like 6 foot by 4 foot pieces of artwork that are all individual pieces
Wow.
of paper that are torn, or she'll use the Cricut machine to develop out to cut very specific pieces. And they're very, very well received in the artistic community.
Wow.
And she's also last year through our Inspire Arts program, she was actually teaching classes in East Hartford to members of the community of how to create artwork using her techniques.
I love
So,
it.
and
Wow.
she's competitively employed through the agency to produce these pieces of artwork. And she's been, as I said, there was a documentary film made about her, and the artwork is becoming more and more popular. She was represented in the Outsider Art Convention in New York a couple of years ago, and there's her work was shown at the Kishi Gallery in Avon last year. And it's currently being displayed as well as a lot of our other participants in the art program at the Bradley International Airport. We have
Oh,
a
wow.
display there. They came to us and asked if if that we would be open to displaying some of that artwork. And yep, and that tells the story. It raises awareness, and she's a very good ambassador for the brain injury community. Because again, you look at the individual, you see somebody that may be struggling to walk a little bit, they may not be able to respond as quickly as you expect to your questions, but her ability to express herself through art is second to none. And it's about giving individuals an opportunity to express themselves and their perspective as well, giving somebody an opportunity to display their perspective of the world and their lives. Art's an amazing avenue for that. And it's
It
about listening.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely is. And I think, as you pointed out, somebody sees her, she's not as physically capable maybe as
Yeah.
someone else might be. It takes her longer to have a conversation with you. People who don't have experiences around people who are different from they are assume that she's not very smart.
Yeah.
But she is, and she has something to offer. And I think as unfortunately more people probably find themselves in situations where they've had acquired brain injuries and more of them are out in the community, hopefully people start to recognize that this is not somebody who's not a bright, intelligent person. This is somebody
Yeah.
who has some other things that they're working with.
Yeah. And we see that a lot. Individuals. We have another participant who is in the process of developing his own business, and that individual, was a contractor. Went to a job in. He was from Connecticut. He had a state-based job in Massachusetts that he was working on. They had told him and his business partner at the time that the exterior staircase on the building had been checked. He walked out onto it with his business partner and it collapsed 60 feet. His business partner unfortunately passed away immediately. He fell 60 feet basically onto his face, lost his arm, has 20% vision in one eye. Every bone in his face was damaged. And he ended up at QLI, which is a specialized rehabilitational hospital in Nebraska, and then came back. And he's been with us for a couple of years. And to look at this gentleman's neuropsychological evaluation and read it, and it was kind of an eye opener, again, a reminder to even myself, who's been in the field for as long as I have, you can't look at the piece of paper and judge the individual because he came through the door and it wasn't what I was expecting because he was still very much in there, very cognizant, able to hold communications, and I don't like he had maintained a lot of himself. There were some issues with memory and the points of memory being he was drawing from long-term memory rather than short-term memory. But outside of that, you can have a conversation with the gentleman very, very easily. It was actually tough to kind of hold him back a little bit in terms of we tried to see how he would be in our woodshop program, and he was he wanted to use all the power tools, he didn't want any support staff, and it was like no, we get and it was frustrating for him to be monitored in that way because he had his own ways of doing things. He'd been a successful businessman, independent, and all of a sudden there's somebody else there saying no, we've got to be safe, we need to do it this way. And that was interesting to see as well, because
You need
that's
a
the
way to
change.
test out. Show me that you
Yeah,
know how to use that jigsaw, even if your way is a
yeah,
little bit different. It's safe
yeah,
enough. Okay, move on.
yeah,
Yeah, I think the other thing that I mean, I know from working within the field of special education for such a long time, uh, acquired brain injury is certainly not my area of expertise. I've had some contact with some folks, but the range is so wide. Like
yeah,
you have an acquired brain injury, but
yeah.
no one would ever know it. And there could be somebody who is very physically challenged, communication challenged, maybe not able to move around independently any longer. And that range, I think, makes it potentially more confusing for people to try to understand what's going on.
It, it's as you said, it is such a wide range. When I speak publicly, one of the first questions I ask in the room how many individuals here have had brain injuries? Most people put their hands don't go up. How many people have had a concussion? All of a sudden, hands start flying up when you've had a brain injury.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. And I've worked with a range of different individuals. One of our clients was literally at work. They had changed his office because they were painting his regular office, and he stood up and hit his head on our overhead cabinet.
Oh,
Was never the same again.
oh dear.
And these things can happen. And some individuals, I put it this way, sometimes the packaging can be a little bit crumpled, but they're very, very much inside. And that's also an educational piece because it's learning from individuals. There was one person I provided supports to early in my career, um, who had been homeless for an extended period of time and was very, very difficult to get to spend any money. And he used a walker, and he needed to do a spend down. So I had asked him, would you like to purchase an electric wheelchair because it will make it easier for you? And he had difficulties in communicating, verbal communication, and he asked for a pen and paper, and he wrote down on paper, if I use an electric wheelchair, that will make me weaker and will make people assume I'm disabled. Oh, okay. That taught me something in terms of you cannot make assumptions, and you have to listen and take your time in whatever communication that the individual wants to provide. It's listen to that because
Yeah.
everybody's got their own thoughts and feelings that you need to honor.
And I think a lot of folks just they try to go under the radar.
Yeah.
They sort of, present well, and
Yeah.
then as you get to know them, you start to find out things. Like you and I have a mutual person
Yeah.
that I supported in the past, and on the surface, everything looks just fine. you
Yeah.
know. And there were things that I thought, well, I bet this person could do this, and I bet this person could do that. And then, as I got to know this person more, what I realized was the outside shell was working really well, but some of the inside parts were not necessarily going, all the wires were not going where they needed to
Yeah.
go. Um,
They're very, very good at masking. We see a lot of masking occurring. And if you don't know the individual, you don't spend enough time with the individual, you don't pick up on the deficits and
no.
the support needs. And sometimes they're not even aware of the support needs because of memory issues.
Yeah. Or they don't want them because
Yeah.
they don't want they don't want to have, like, the guy that you thought a
Yeah.
wheelchair was a lovely idea and thought it
Yeah.
was a terrible idea because
Yeah.
it drew a different level of attention to him. But I would think at this point, though, you've been in the field long enough that you've really seen a lot of changes in assistive technology. People can pick up this little thing here
Yeah.
and have a lot more opportunity and individually, like, at the grocery store or whatever, than they could have even when you started in the field. So I would anticipate that that's been helpful for many people.
Been hugely helpful, even in terms to the diabetes management systems that are in place now, which are,
Yeah.
which is huge because that individual no longer needs to be completely dependent upon a staff member to help them regulate and track their blood sugars. It's going on and it's on the apps.
Yeah.
There's a lot more in place, even for those individuals that might struggle to be independent in alone time hours if they've got a smaller service plan.
Yeah.
Technologies come in, ERS systems, elements like that, to enable them not to be completely dependent upon staff support,
Yeah.
which is important because not everybody needs that level of support.
Or nor or they need it, but they don't want it. So,
Yeah,
like, finding the in-between piece. We have just a couple of minutes. I think one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is the way that services, unfortunately, are changing, and not because we're getting better at giving services, but because funding is getting to be a challenge. So, um, where do you think we're going from here? We've got probably about a minute for you to answer that question.
it's a scary place to be at this moment in time. Service plans are being cut without anybody fully understanding the consequences of that. When I see service plans attempting to be reduced when the care manager has spent less than 4 hours across the whole year with that individual, and the individual at DSS who's signing off on this as a registered nurse has never met the individual, that concerns me greatly and should be a concern for everybody because the ability to sustain a brain injury is very, very real and can happen at any moment in time. And if it's your loved one, you don't want to be in that situation where they can't access the supports that they need.
Yeah. There was a piece of data I saw once that 2/3 of all individuals will have a disability at some point in time in their
Yeah.
life. It might be temporary, you might be on crutches because you have a broken leg, or it could be something permanent. So literally, almost all of us are going to find ourselves in one of those situations, either for the long term or for the short term. And I think hopefully it makes people more aware of the fact that we need to start advocating for our fellow citizens.
Yes. Because that's when we're voting, we're making sure the people we're voting for are willing to advocate to the same level.
Yeah. So, well, Jamie, I very much appreciate you spending this time with me. Um, as often happens when I haven't someone come on, we could probably talk for hours, but I'm bringing somebody in for the next episode who is an individual who's actually had several traumatic brain injuries, unfortunately for her, but doing quite successfully in life. And so we may circle back around and come back and ask you some other questions in the future. And I hope that that's a possibility.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who's been listening, and we look forward to you listening to upcoming episodes as well. Thank you for listening to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. Join me, Dr. Lori, on Transformation Talk Radio every second and fourth Monday at 11:30 Pacific Time as we continue to explore navigating a world not designed for diversity. For advocacy and support for individuals with disabilities, let's connect. Learn more about consulting and life coaching at notoholisticconsulting.com.